Hello, welcome to this second part of this third lesson. Any object of intelligence, the essence, is therefore immaterial. But there are several degrees of immateriality, several ways for the essence to be immaterial, depending on whether matter is included in its definition or not. For example, the object of physics is the corporeal being, and therefore matter appears in its definition, in the essence of the corporeal being, because it is corporeal. And it is why we can make a drawing to explain it. We do not draw the object of physics, which is immaterial, but we can make drawings to make people understand, just as we can draw furniture to make people understand what a piece of furniture is. The object of mathematics also retains something of matter in its definition, as it studies quantity, which is an attribute of matter. And that is why we can still make mathematical drawings to make people understand. We do not draw the mathematical object, which is immaterial, object of intelligence and not of the senses, but we can make drawings to understand. In these two sciences, physics and mathematics, we make figures to make people understand. The figures are not the definitions, since it is always immaterial, but the figures help to make it understand because there is matter in the definition. But in the object of mathematics, there is no more matter, even in the definition, as for example in the notion of being, or the notion of essence, because there can be essences and definitions of objects completely devoid of matter. We thus begin to understand what metaphysics is, all the more if we know that meta means after in Greek. Metaphysics is what stands after physics, that is to say, whose object is completely material. That is to say, that does not even retain any more matter in its definition. The object of metaphysics is no longer anything sensible, like essence, which means that we absolutely cannot represent it sensibly. It is the object of intelligence, of pure intelligence, with no possible sensitive representation. Sorry. The other objects of science are also immaterial, as we said, because they are universal, because they are also expressed by definitions, but they can be represented by images to make people understand, while the metaphysic object, like being, one cannot absolutely represent it by something sensitive. Hence the difficulty of metaphysics science, because we are used to represent everything with images, and there is no more image, there is nothing more sensitive. And so we should not be surprised if we have trouble understanding what it is, because we are there on the fine-tuning edge of intelligence, where we no longer have so much feet on the ground, where we have to float, so to speak, above our usual world of images. This is a beautiful program that is offered here, but which requires, in return, some efforts to understanding, as we said. But on the other hand, these notions are very easy to grasp if we confine ourselves to the definitions as it is, without more, without trying to stick images on it precisely, because no image can ever represent a metaphysical notion. On the contrary, it might hinder understanding. Therefore, a very important recommendation in all these courses, which are essentially based on metaphysical notions to better understand, to receive the definitions of the concepts as they are, simply with intelligence alone, without trying to put any images on them. Alright? For example, when I talk to you about substance, which is another expression of the essence we will see, or even of the soul, of the form, you should not represent it you as a kind of shadow or of cloud in man permeating his body. It will be necessary to grasp it with pure intelligence only from the definition as it is, without seeking to add anything else to it. For example, when we say that the essence of all being is what makes being to be what it is, and not something else, we must stop there with this definition, without trying to put over the notion of life or energy or anything else. So for summarize, the rule in 2 points to take full advantage of these courses. First, do not put any image on the concepts. On the contrary, dismiss them when they come. And second, not to add anything to the definition that we give. Seek to grasp. Seek to grasp it, to retain it as it is, in its very simple understanding, nothing more. Seek to grasp it, to retain it as it is, in its very simple understanding, nothing more. A metaphysical object is very difficult, and at the same time very simple to grasp. It is very simple because this object is very simple in itself, and it is very difficult because this metaphysical object stands in a field in which we are not used to be, a domain where there is no longer any image at all, where the object is purely intelligible, that is to say, the domain of pure intelligence. But you already grasp notions like that of existence. You know very well how to differentiate between a living animal and a dead animal. And this difference, you make it because you grasp without even nothing how the existence which is in the living animal, when it is no longer in the dead animal. You really grasp it, otherwise you wouldn't be unable to make the difference. You really grasp it, otherwise you would be unable to make the difference. It is practice. Practice makes perfect. We will get to know the definition of these metaphysical objects. And we will assimilate them with practice. Because we will constantly use them, that's the goal, to discover this world beyond physics, already in this natural world, and then, and above all, in the supernatural world, with theology. We can thus still understand in part the whole need to do metaphysics before entering theology. Well, yes, because we are going to go into theology, to the world of spirits, of God, and of the angels, who have absolutely no body or matter, and therefore we absolutely cannot represent them with drawings, but only achieve with pure intelligence. All right? And even if we can represent supernatural beings like Jesus Christ, who is God incarnate, it is not with an image that we grasp his divinity in him. The image will only represent us, man, which many people, by the way, only saw in his time. To go beyond this appearance, this sensitive, it is necessary to go beyond physics, that is to say, inter-metaphysics. One could object that one enters this supernatural world only by faith. Yes, certainly we will see how. But first, faith must be seriously prepared by the reasons to believe, to be well-founded, to have an adult faith and not a simple belief. And secondly, faith itself is to believe in what God tells us. And God expresses himself to us in our human language, which is made up only of notions, and mainly of metaphysical notions, like notions of truth, of love, of freedom, of person, of substance, of being. Every man knows love. But if we ask, what is love? We are certainly difficult to answer. What it is exactly? The exact definition. We must see as a necessity that there is no enter this metaphysical world. We thus see as a necessity that there is to enter this metaphysical world, which is a kind of anteroom of the supernatural world. This is also why it was founded by Aristotle, who, by committing to it, had in mind this upper world still very mysterious for him, but on the road from which he has cleared our way, which we are very grateful for. So difficulty and at the same time simplicity in grasping these metaphysical notions and great necessity. One of the objects of metaphysics, therefore, is essence, which also has other names, depending on the aspect in which it is considered. The main object of metaphysics is being, which we will specify soon, but we will first give these various names of the essence to clarify its concept as much as possible. We specify as much as possible because what we are going to give now is something very difficult to understand. So, you shouldn't be surprised if you don't understand them at the first try as clearly as you would like. But if we persevere, and if we manage to grasp the different nuances of it with time, practice and exercise, we will have there very powerful tools for understanding many problems of the world, incomprehensible otherwise. So don't worry if it's not as clear as you would like. We will then have to start working them, establishing some summary, and we will see them again in the rest of the lessons when they will be recalled and used in various situations, which will help us to assimilate them. Intelligence, therefore, seeks its object with its always same question, what it is. What is it? In all fields of knowledge, from the 10-year-old child who begins to seek the truth, to the scientist who works to advance science, what is it? It is this subject, this essence, which takes several names depending on the aspect in which it is used. The essence is called, first, quiddity, from the Latin, quid si tres, in Latin, quid si tres. What is the thing? And who says what the thing is? Quiddity says what the thing is. Second, the definition. As this subject is expressed in human language with words. Third, the essence, as that is what makes the thing what it is. The horse is horse by its essence of horse. The horse has the essence of the horse to be horse. 4. Nature. This essence is the principle of activity in the being in which it is, like the nature of the bird is to steal and lay eggs. 5. The substance. To distinguish it from accidents, which are as like added to it. We will see how. 6. The intelligible, as it is the object grasped by intelligence, as the sensible is that which is grasped by the senses. 7. The notion or concept or conception, that is what is in intelligence when it grasps the essence, when it understands. The notion is in the intelligence, what the intelligence is in the thing. No. The notion is in the intelligence, what the intelligible is in the thing. 8. The explanation, the reason, insofar as it explains what the thing is, as an event. The reason, the explanation of an event is its essence. All this is the same thing, the essence of things, what makes a thing what it is, which answers the question, what is it, expressed in different ways, depending on whether you consider one of its aspects. It is a totally material object, which is found in everything that exists, since that is what makes the thing what it is. That is to say, therefore, which is particular in the thing, and which is universal in intelligence. This object, the essence, is always particular in the thing and universal in the intelligence. We continue our discovery of this metaphysical notion. I hope that you understand. I am French and I try to speak English. You have understood. I do what I can. Intelligence, therefore, by seeking its subject, by seeking to define it, as we said earlier, always seeks to define it by simpler, better known notions, like the notion of man, by that of animal, saying that it is an animal endowed with reason. We define by differences and similarities, as we see in the definition of man. We see a resemblance to animals and a difference with reason, intelligence. However, we cannot go back indefinitely by looking for simpler notions to explain, to define the more difficult, less known notions. This is what has led philosophers to discover the notion which is the basis of all definitions, which is found everywhere, which is the simplest, the easiest to understand, the most obvious, and which for this does not need simpler, more obvious notions to explain it. It can be grasped directly. It is a notion of being. The notion of being is the simplest, the most common. That is to say, that we find in all things, and the most obvious. This is what you say when you can find a word, when you say something, a thing. For example, between a thought, an event, a piece of furniture, a rock, a rose, a camel, and this man called Paul, the most common notion that we find is being. That is, this which has the existence. This is the definition of being. And all these designated things have in common that they exist. Paul, in our example, has the reason, but not the camel. The camel has the senses, but not the rose. The rose has life, but not the rock. The rock is bodily, like furniture, but it is natural, while furniture is artificial. There is no matter in the event, like in rock or in furniture, and it is something that exists, however. Thought, too, is something that exists, but not outside the mind. All these things have differences between them, which allows them to be distinguished, and similarly, all the realities of the world. This is why they are diversified, but they all have something in common. It is the being, because they all have this characteristic, which is to have existence. You know? This is what you find last when you want to find a simpler way to define something. For example, when we want to define the man, we say, it is a reasonable animal. If you want to define what an animal is, we say, it is a living being that has senses. We notice that the notion of being appears. Then, what is a living being? It is a being who has life. We can still affirm that because there are beings who know have the life, like inner beings. But then, when we ask, what is a being? We no longer have a simpler concept to explain. But in fact, we don't need it, because everyone understands very well what a being is. It is something that exists, that has existence. Let us see how we define by looking for something simpler to explain. And if that is not enough, we go back further to find something even simpler to make people understand. No, one cannot go back indefinitely in this way. One must necessarily arrive at a primary notion beyond which there is no simpler way to explain it, but which does not need it, in fact, because it is self-evident, is a notion of being. We cannot in fact go up indefinitely, because if there is no first, there can also be not following. If there is no first, there can also be not following. And for any definition, it is the same. And this is why this notion of being is the most common, that which is found everywhere, because when we want to define a thing, whatever this thing is, when we look for the simplest way to define it, we necessarily end up there. The notion of being is therefore the first of all definitions, and it is by determining it what we define everything else. Determine it that we define everything else. For example, it is by adding body to it that one defines bodily being. It is by adding life to bodily being that we define living being. It is by adding sensitive knowledge to living being that we define the animal. And it is by adding reason to animal that we define man. The notion of being is the basis of any definition, because any definition is based on simpler, more common, more obvious terms. And the term, the most common notion of everything is being. This is a proper object of metaphysics. To understand it better, we have to compare metaphysics with other sciences. What is a science, simply speaking? It is superior human knowledge. But basically, the process is always the same for any man who wonders what it is and answers this question with a sense, definition. And that each science does it in a particular field of reality. Physics about the changing corporeal being, mathematics about the quantity, etc. And so all science, like any man, will seek simpler notions to explain its definitions to define. But each science does not need to go back to being to deal with its subject. Physics, for example, starts from the changing body being as it is founded in nature. Mathematics starts from unity, point and line. Physics does not need to ask what is body being to study the change, and similarly mathematics does not need to ask what unit, point and line is to study number and figures. Each science starts from principles that it accepts for real and defines all the rest of its field from there. Only metaphysics goes back to the top, the being, which is at the root of everything, to ask what is being. This is his particular field as a science, metaphysics. Philosophers now stop asking questions about reality. They don't stop at the body being, at the unity line or figure, etc. He asks, what is body being? What is unity? What is line, etc.? He don't stop asking questions to the end. He is not satisfied until he has answered all his essential questions to the bottom. And that is how he came to know about being and its properties. It is like this that metaphysics is born. We thus understand how the philosopher is essentially a metaphysicist, was a very philosopher. And more, we understand how metaphysics is the science of the highest abstractions, because it goes to the root of things, putting away everything that is like superimposed on being, and not essentially constitutes it. We thus see that metaphysics is the science of being as such, where the other sciences study being in a more particular aspect, like mathematics, being as quantifiable, physics, the being inert in movement, biology, the body living being, logic, the being of reason, etc. We thus understand how metaphysics is necessary to resolve the fundamental problems, and how it is fundamental for all the other sciences. And we will see that metaphysics manages the other sciences, in that it demonstrates their principles, what these do not know to do. The object of metaphysics, therefore, is being and its properties. What are these properties? Well, first of all, is to be one, true, and good. There are even more than properties. There are sort of equivalencies of being. They can be used equivalently for each other. We can say, for example, us being is true, one and good, or all that is one is being true and good, or all that is good is being true and one, etc. They are called transcendental, because like the concept of being, they stand above everything. They are at the root of all things. The being, it is what exists, and everything that exists has a certain unity, is true, in that it meets a certain definition, and is good, in that it is the object of one tendency. For example, water, which is a being, is the object of tendency for any animal that needs to drink. All being is therefore true, one, and good. Now, let's stick to the definition of being. That's what science is looking for. We remember, science is looking for the definition. The definition of being is what exists. Whatever it is. If there is no being, there is nothing. It is nothingness. And all that has a certain form of existence is a being anyway, however small it is, as little, determined as it be. We can also take as definition, being is what is determined in some way. If there is absolutely no determination, there is nothing. It is nothingness. Nothingness is absolute non-being. And all that is not nothing, or that has some determination, everything that has a certain form of existence is some being. It should be noted here, metaphysics is the science of being real, as opposed to logic, which is the science of being of reason. Very important, this differentiation. The being of reason is a being which exists only in thought, in the mind, independently of all external existence, but which thought needs for its structure, so that thought is what it must be, that is to say, expression of the real. For example, nothingness is the being of reason. It has no equivalence in reality, since precisely it is a total absence of being, of existence. Likewise, blindness means that a man is deprived of sight. Blindness is a non-being, since it is a lack of being, the lack of having sight. There are no beings, but we sometimes need them to express certain truths. It is the same thing for the zero in mathematics, or the empty set, without which mathematics would not be what it is. Or again, being a subject for a notion, or verb, is a being of reason, which has no equivalent in reality. For example, in the proposition, this cat is black, the cat, animal, and the color black exist in reality. But the fact that a cat is subject in the sentence does not exist in reality. It is a being of reason, built-in reason to express the place it holds there, to express this fact that the cat is black. The being of reason only exists in the mind, and not the real being. On the other hand, the being thought is not a being of reason. It is a being in the thought. It is the same being existing in reality, which is in thought in the mind. We will take the time to see this in our 5 courses on knowledge. Metaphysics is therefore the science of real being, and of being as being, that is to say, in all its nudity, without additional determination, as happens, for example, with the inert being in physics. Here we are at the bottom of reality, beyond which we cannot go. It is a role of the philosopher to get to the bottom of things, to ask questions until we get to the bottom of everything. We follow, like that, the advice of Jesus, who taught us to dig to the rock. In this regard, it must be said that the metaphysical notion of being is very mysterious. We will talk about it again. But we can say a few words. I put it right now. We understand, in fact, that we are there before a mystery. This notion of being is at the same time what is stripped of all determination, so that his notion is grasped in all its purity, and it is at the same time which is closed with all determinations, for being is all that exists and can exist. Being is everything and more than everything, so to speak. It is, at the same time, the smallest dust in the world, and God himself. Because this smallest dust has existence like God, not at all in the same way, obviously, we will see, but existence all the same, and that it enough to define it as a being like God. Obviously, we will see the difference, which is the biggest. Let us understand a little of what the mystery is this notion, in that it is at the same time the simplest and the most complex notion. There is in this notion like a contradiction, which will be a plowshare where human thought will split in its beginning to give birth to two main currents in philosophy, which will remain until today. We will clarify the problem as best as possible, but there will always remain a part of mystery, because behind, in the distance, is the mystery of God, of absolute being. It's the exciting adventure of philosophy. And that is why, in part, to then define the other kinds of beings on the basis of this simple notion of being at the outset, we cannot, at the very beginning, define the diversity of beings by making addition of determination, as will be done next with the substance, as will be done next with the substance. To the notion of substance, in fact, we can add the notion of life, sensitive knowledge, or rational knowledge, to define the plant, animal, or man. But with the notion of being, we cannot add something else to diversify being, because everything that can be added to being will be being, and therefore we'll never manage to diversify it. To define, we need simpler notions, which we assemble to define what we have to define. For example, to define man, we combine the notion of animal and the notion of reason. But with being, one cannot proceed in this way. One cannot add being to define something, because thus one will not advance. One will always remain in the first notion of being, which is at the same time the simplex and the most complex notion. The notion deprived of all determination, and at the same time rich in absolutely all possible determinations. All right, I hope that you are well. Up to soon to the third part.